This is a quick reminder that Makeshift Stories has shifted to a monthly release schedule. You can look forward to the same great original and imaginative content now released in the first week of each month. Is there a place and time where logic breaks down and wonderment begins? Could that be somewhere or sometime along an infinite line between the reasonable and the highly unlikely? Join us on a journey into the improbable. Makeshift Stories presents episode 305, Floor 42, read by Steve Peterson. Opening and closing theme by Matthew Erdman. Somewhere and sometime, following the clues might lead to a very unexpected result.
The winter sun, low in the southern sky, reflected off the curved glass facade of the old office tower, casting pools of light on the street and surrounding buildings. The glare forced Carmen to squint as she walked around the giant gas-powered generator supplying electricity to the structure. Its hot exhaust furnished a momentary break from the bitter cold. She picked up her pace and headed to the main entrance. Carmen hated on-site license audits, but she was lucky to have a job after she failed to stop a geneticist from escaping across the northern border with intellectual property allegedly stolen from Advanced Global Health Systems. During the post-operation investigation, she discovered that the supposed thief had worked for AGHS and invented the IP the company claimed he stole, a gene mod that prevented Alzheimer's, potentially worth billions. All the parties involved wanted a scapegoat, and she had been in the wrong place at the right time. Heavy glass doors slid open as she approached the entrance, and a gust of warm air escaped as Carmen walked through. All vertical farms were kept slightly pressurized, so unwanted biologicals couldn't enter the building. The doors slid shut, and another set 2 meters away opened. "Hello," a middle-aged man with olive skin and jet-black hair popular a decade ago, greeted. He stood well back from the entrance, shifting weight from one foot to the other, and wore green coveralls with a corporate logo and name patch attached to the breast pocket. "Welcome to the Bow Closed Systems Foods Vertical Farm Number 5, Auditor Lopez." "Agent Lopez?" Carmen automatically corrected. But the man was right. She had been busted down from an IP field agent to a lowly auditor. "Under the authority of Bio International Fast Grow Tomatoes, I'm here to confirm your adherence to the terms of your license." "Then you've come to the right place," the man joked nervously, encouraging Carmen to follow. "I'm journeyman farmhand Salvador Morales, day shift. Is this your first audit of Farm 5? "Why do you ask?" Carmen said, trying to hide her disdain for the work. "I haven't met you before. I was just recently assigned. Management promoted the previous auditor to field agent." Taking my old job, she wanted to scream. She had only one major screw-up in 20 years on her record, and this was how she was treated. The client had demanded her head and threatened to break their contract if the company didn't fire her. SynthBio claimed she was lucky to have a job, but it felt more like punishment than luck. "I just need to look at your production records and, if necessary, do a spot inventory of plants." It was tedious work, especially auditing large international operations like Closed Systems Foods. Internationals had no reason to cheat on their license agreements. The small no-name operators were where the enforcement action was, and now SynthBio wouldn't even trust her in low-stakes cases involving a few extra buckets of illegally grown carrots. Salvador led her past an old security desk, through an empty lobby, and up an inoperable escalator to a mezzanine that Closed Systems had converted into the farm's control center. The air was heavy with the odor of earth and fertilizer and the sharp smell of tomato vines. The Bow was converted to a vertical farm about a decade after the Great Collapse. It's the oldest vertical in operation in the capital area. Salvador explained in tour guide mode, turning to make sure Carmen was following. Something about Salvador twigged Carmen's investigative instincts. Then, in a rush, it came. It was the man's eyes. If she still had a detection wand, she would have fluoresced the farmhand to scan for gene mod licenses. But since the border incident, SynthBio didn't even trust her with a basic handheld laser scanner. How had she fallen so low? Despite that, the investigator and Carmen couldn't let it go. So she asked a leading question. "I like your eyes. Where did you get them?" "Huh?" The question caught Salvador off guard. "Your eyes, are they natural or mods? The iris pattern's very striking." "I don't have the money for cosmetics," the man dismissed curtly, guiding Carmen to a seat in front of the desk overlooking the lobby. "Here, you can use this terminal to check our production records." "Are the systems mostly automated?" she asked, glancing down at the empty lobby below as she settled into the offered seat. "The front office is," Salvador explained. "That's why there's no one around. The farm floors are another story. This is an old operation, Auditor Lopez. There's still a lot of manual labor involved." "And the company's competitive despite paying human workers?" she probed. "The farm is still in operation, isn't it?" Salvador said. "Questions about staffing and costs must be directed to the head office. I've already opened the production spreadsheets. They're on the center monitor." Carmen had been an investigator long enough to know when someone was being evasive. But what would a farmhand need to hide? She made a mental note and then moved on. "Right. Sorry. Old habits die hard." Then Carmen added, "I was an investigator. Human gene mods, medical, cosmetic, that kind of thing. It's the expensive stuff, like eyes and body mods, that the industry protects by hiring agencies like mine. You get good at spotting unlicensed mods even without a detector." She stared accusingly into his eyes. Salvador's face was a mask. "I wouldn't know about that kind of stuff," he replied. It wasn't the reaction she'd expect from someone with black market eyes, but she'd bet what was left of her reputation on them being unlicensed. "That's not what I'm here for," she reminded herself. "I'll leave you to your work. Call me if you want to do an audit on one of the hydroponic floors," Salvador said, then turned and disappeared into a back room. It took less than an hour for Carmen to comb through the production data. As expected, everything checked out, so she didn't need to do a plant count on a randomly selected floor and row. She didn't expect to find anything. However, there were the farmhand's eyes, and she couldn't let it go despite not being her beat anymore. So Carmen called Salvador back. "Hello again," he greeted Carmen with a smile. "How can I help?" "Take me to the top floor." "Okay, then. This way," Salvador said, leading the way to a block of elevators and pressing the call button. One of the doors slid open, and they walked in. Salvador hit the button for the penthouse. There's only flowers and a meeting room up there," he informed Carmen. "We're headed to the 42nd. I'm not allowed to tell you the actual floor until we're on the way up, so you can't warn your colleagues," Carmen explained. "I understand," Salvador said, and pressed the button for the 42nd. They waited in silence as the elevator trundled up. The car had been stripped down to its frame, and the sides had been replaced with chain link. Carmen could see the concrete walls of the shaft scroll past and count the floors as they went up. 39, 40, 41, Carmen mumbled, then paused. 42 seemed to take forever. Finally, the elevator dinged and the doors opened. The smell of tomato vines riding on moist air wafted into the elevator shaft, almost overwhelming Carmen. "If you please." Salvador stood to one side, gesturing for Carmen to step onto the floor. Squinting under the intense grow lights, she shaded her eyes with one hand. "Doesn't the glare bother you?" Carmen asked, glancing at Salvador's eyes. His pupils were dots. Natural eyes didn't adapt to bright light that fast. He ignored her question, moving past her to stand at the start of the first row of plants that fanned outward from the central elevator core. "Which section do you want to examine?" 27, Carmen said, pulling a random number out of the air. "Sure, this way." Carmen spotted other farmhands working between the rows, tending the hydroponics or picking ripe fruit. She wasn't sure if the green coveralls made everyone look similar, or if closed systems' hiring practice was biased toward a particular body type. "Here we are," Salvador announced, stopping at the end of an anonymous row of tomatoes. The plants were in full bloom, clumps of small yellow flowers sprouting from the tangle of green vines. "Should I leave you here? How long will it take to count them?" "Only a few minutes. We use these," Carmen said, pulling out a pair of thick-rimmed smart glasses. "I just need to walk down the row. The cameras in these frames and an onboard processor do all the work." She clicked a button on one arm. "I'm recording now." Carmen got a close-up of Salvador's face, then turned and strolled down the row. Synth Bio's office was on the other side of the empty riverbed, bearing the same name as the old building where the vertical farm was, the Bow. The river was mainly a rocky trail that cut the city in half. The glaciers that once fed it had long ago melted, leaving only a tiny icy thread of turbid runoff. Carmen thought of the bridge she was walking over as the bones of a bygone era, like the ribs of a long-dead whale exposed at low tide. A cold wind needled her cheeks, forcing her to turtle further into the collar of her coat. When she had been an IP agent, she would have taken a cab, but the license audit division of Synth Bio didn't cover travel costs. Being forced to walk or take transit was a waste of her time, and so was counting tomato plants. Her ticket out of auditing was proving Salvador and his farmhand buddies were using unlicensed mods, and more importantly, that Closed Systems was complicit. It would be a big scandal, maybe big enough to redeem her reputation. With a renewed sense of purpose, Carmen leaned into the biting wind. Auditors generally spent most of a shift in the field, only returning to the office at the end of the day to tabulate their results, so Carmen had the fourth floor all to herself. She dropped into her cubicle, looked around again to ensure she was alone, and opened the audit system, just in case. In a smaller window, she connected to the zone's IP license registry, cropped the vid she had taken of Salvador's eyes, uploaded it, and directed the system to search for matching iris patterns. At first, nothing came back. Just before she was ready to give up, a match appeared. Eurocosmetics, patent 2250, iris pattern 8. "Gotcha," she cried. "Now, let's see who you are." Carmen opened another small window to the Economic Zone's citizen database. This time, she fed it a still of Salvador, expecting to find a citizen history, maybe under an alias. "No match found," the system reported. "That's not possible," she muttered and tried a search of Closed Systems' staff list. It came back with only 3 names, all supervisors at the automated Bow Vertical Farm facility, and none were Salvador Morales. "What?" she exclaimed. "I saw at least 10 human farmhands on the 42nd floor." Running one hand through her hair, she sighed and leaned back, confused. "Auditor Lopez!" The surly voice made her heart jump. Carmen swung around to find the head of IP investigations staring at her with daggers in her eyes. "The system alerted me to your queries." The lead inspector looked angry. "I've done my best to protect you, and you repay me by poking around in data you're no longer authorized to access?" She had balled her hands into fists. Tell me why I shouldn't fire you right now. There's something odd going on at Closed Systems Farm 5, Carmen explained. It's something to do with the audit? No, Carmen admitted reluctantly. The audit was fine. Then drop it, Auditor Lopez. I checked, and you've got 5 other farms to do this week. Stay in your lane, or you'll find yourself dumpster diving on the street. The lead inspector warned and then left. Carmen hesitated. Instead of uploading the final audit, she marked it incomplete and headed back to Vertical Farm 5. She was half expecting to be greeted by synth bio agents, there to arrest her for misappropriating company property. However, the plaza at the base of the bow was empty. The field agent toolkit she had liberated was slung over one shoulder. This time, no one was there to greet her at the front entrance, forcing her to present her auditor credentials to the automated door. She was about to give up when Salvador appeared behind the plate glass and waved at her. Then the thick glass doors swung open. "Welcome again, Auditor Lopez. We weren't expecting you back so soon." "Is there a problem with the audit?" Salvador asked, positioning himself so he could block Carmen's path. "I need another plant count," she lied, stepping around Salvador into the lobby. The farmhand spun around to follow. "You seemed satisfied when you left?" "I'm not now. The audit is over when I say it's over. This time, I want to spot check the 41st, Carmen announced, heading to the elevators. "I've informed the shift supervisor," Salvador warned, racing ahead to press the call button. An elevator door opened, and they both stepped in. Carmen waited for the doors to slide shut, then rounded on the farmhand. "How can someone who doesn't exist inform anyone?" Salvador backed away. I don't understand what you're talking about." "I checked the zone citizen records, and you're not in the database. Closed Systems lists this building as an automated facility. Only 3 supervisors work here. You're not one of them." Carmen pulled a handheld GeneMod scanner from the borrowed field agent kit, switched it on, and pointed it at Salvador. He covered his eyes as the machine's laser flashed. "That won't do any good," Carmen informed him. "The genetic modification markers are in your skin. This machine makes the markers fluoresce and reads them. It was the eyes that gave you away. I recognize the irises from an old ad campaign. They're out of fashion, but they're still patent protected." Carmen glanced down at the readout and pointed the scanner at Salvador again. "Nothing? That's impossible," she exclaimed. "Your eyes are mods. The machine must be broken. It claims your baseline. No genetic alterations. Everyone has at least one." "What's going on?" she demanded. The elevator dinged at the 41st floor, and the door slid open. Carmen backed out, keeping her eyes on Salvador. The farmhand followed, the door sliding shut behind him. She suddenly recognized the danger and looked for a call button to keep the elevator there, but there wasn't one. She was trapped on the floor, and no one at Synth Bio knew she was there. She had made a rookie mistake because she was obsessed with getting reinstated. "Who are you?" Carmen asked, buying time to think. "I'm Salvador Morales, farmhand. Bow Vertical Farm number 5, Salvador recited, without conviction, like a greeting in a foreign language. "There's no Salvador Morales, and no farmhands work at this facility." Carmen heard rustling behind her and twisted around. 6 men and women stood in an arc, 6 people who, according to the official records, didn't exist. They were similar in height and build to Salvador and shared the same copyrighted iris patterns and designer black hair. "You're not clones," Carmen stated. "What are you then?" Salvador moved around to join the 6. "Sorry, we've been directed to detain you," he almost apologized. Carmen's eyes darted, spotting an emergency exit sign pasted to the elevator core. Its bent arrow suggested there were stairs around the corner. She had to play for time. I bet none of you would exist if I ran all your photos. Am I right? The group of farm hands looked at each other. How much does Closed Systems Foods pay you? Nothing, I bet. You're all illegals. What did they offer you? Fake citizen cards if you became slaves for a few years? Again, the farm hands looked at each other. We're not illegals, Salvador finally said, edging Carmen back against the elevators. Without breaking eye contact, she began to creep toward the emergency exit sign, one hand digging into the field agent kit, desperately searching for something to create a distraction. We've worked here all our lives. The company looks after us. But there's no record of you, Salvador, not even a grainy CCD image from a street cam. It's impossible not to leave some kind of trace evidence. There's nothing, unless... The realization hit her like a brick. You've never left this building. I'm right, aren't I? Salvador hesitated. We can't. The air outside would kill us. How? That doesn't make any sense. It's the dust. It carries microbes and bacteria our immune systems can't deal with. Sorry about this, but we have to get back to work. We're going to tie you up and leave you for security. He nodded to the other farm hands, but before they could move, Carmen pulled her hand out of the field agent kit and tossed a tiny drone into the air. Record target humans, she directed. Like an angry hummingbird, the little drone sprung to life and darted toward the farmhands, forcing them to duck. Carmen made her move and ran for the emergency exit. She had just enough time to get to the stairwell. Behind her, she could hear Salvador and the others yelling over the whine of the tiny drone's fans. Whack! Silence. Someone had swatted the drone out of the air. Get her! Restrain! A new voice began to demand. The emergency door slammed shut, muffling the rest of the orders. Carmen found herself in a concrete stairwell, floor numbers stenciled to the walls. She could go up or down. Up wasn't going to get her out of the building, but down was the obvious choice. She went up, hoping some plan would make itself evident. Nothing came to mind, except how many flights of stairs had she run up without reaching the next floor? 3? Shouldn't it have been 2? The door below burst open. Salvador and 2 others hesitated for a second before beginning to stampede down. Another opened and slammed shut. Carmen waited until she was sure they were searching level 40, then backtracked down 1 flight. There should be a doorway, she muttered, running her hand along the wall until she felt a straight edge, then backed away. The door had been painted gray to match the walls, and the handle removed. Someone not looking would easily miss it. Carmen dug into the toolkit and found a pry bar for opening drawers and cabinets. She carefully wedged it in the narrow gap between the door and the frame, just above where she guessed the latch would be, then pressed a button on its side. The foam metal device began to expand, the door frame protesting, echoing down the stairwell. Carmen cringed, but there was nothing she could do about the sound. "What was that?" someone yelled. "Come on, come on," Carmen urged, daring a glance down the stairwell. Several flights below, hurried footsteps began ascending. The door popped open with a resounding crack. Carmen fell through and started to run, but a glass wall blocked her path. On the other side were rows of incubators, each machine encapsulating an inert adult human form. "What the?" Carmen blurted out. A hand gripped her by a shoulder and spun her around. Auditor Lopez, a tall, older man in a light blue lab coat, pushed her against the glass while 2 security guards handcuffed her. Behind them, Salvador and 3 other farmhands watched from the stairwell door, the expression on his face ambiguous. Was that concern or disgust? Carmen couldn't decide. "We've got her. Go back to work," the lab-coated man growled, then turned to confront Carmen. "You shouldn't be here, Auditor. Now we have a problem. he warned. Carmen's breath came in short, panicked bursts. You sure do, Carmen forced her voice to steady. You're running an unlicensed gene-modding operation. What are you doing? Offering full-body cosmetic makeovers using stolen gene hacks in exchange for labor? I noticed the eyes right away. They're a Eurocosmetics patent. What I don't get is that the mods won't fluoresce under a detection scanner and that your farmhands are undocumented, not even fake IDs. I checked, and Salvador doesn't exist. I assume it's the same for all of them? Are you withholding their IDs until their work bonds are over? That makes them slaves. The man smirked, adjusting his glasses with a gloved hand. You're only partly correct, Auditor Lopez. We reversed engineered all the mods we use, so we're not infringing any patents. And those people in there, he gestured at the incubators. They're street people, nobodies that have been forgotten. In return for licensing their bodies to us, we make them healthy, alter their physique to turn them into good farmhands, and give them a place to live. Sure, they eat some of what they grow, but the cost to the company is negligible. Cheaper than machines, Auditor Lopez. And they can't quit, the man smiled. They believe that leaving the building will kill them. That was my idea. Making them believe we altered their immune systems was cheaper than doing it and more effective. We also removed and added memories. They don't remember who they were and believe they've worked here all their life. Even in the Great Plains Economic Zone, memory modification is illegal. So is indentured labor, Carmen pointed out. And no one else is going to find out, the lab-coated man sneered. Your sudden disappearance will be tragic, but not unexpected. A disgraced agent, overwhelmed by stress perhaps. It happens. We know about the border incident. You'll make a great farmhand, Auditor Lopez. Carmen's stomach churned. The guards yanked her forward, and Carmen stumbled, her mind racing. She wouldn't allow herself to become another nameless face in a twisted plan to cut operating costs. You're making a mistake, she said, trembling. People will notice. Someone will ask questions. I doubt it. We'll send your office a message from your account saying you quit. After cosmetic alterations, no one will recognize you, and with a few key memory tweaks, you won't know who you were. You'll become a productive member of our little ecosystem. Carmen's nails dug into her palms. You won't get away with this. We already have, he said, turning to leave. Lock her in examination room B. The examination room was little more than a utility closet. After the guards left, Carmen slid to the floor. There had to be a way out. She glanced desperately around the cell, searching for anything she could use. They had taken away her toolkit. The walls were rough, unfinished concrete, and the door was metal with a small window. There was a ventilation shaft above her. It was small, but maybe... Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft tapping on the glass. She looked up, startled. Salvador stood outside, his face tense. He pressed a finger to his lips, then pointed to the lock on her door. Carmen's breath caught. Was he helping her? Before she could react, Salvador pulled a small device from his pocket and pressed it against the lock. The mechanism clicked, and the door slid open. Carmen stared at him, stunned. Why? She whispered. Salvador's eyes darted around. Because I'm not a piece of farm machinery, he said quietly. And neither are you. Now come on, we don't have much time. Carmen had no choice but to follow him to a fire escape. They descended in silence. When they reached the main floor exit, the farmhand hung back. Above them, angry voices and footsteps echoed down. Go! They're going to find us, Salvador encouraged. You're not coming? Carmen asked. I can't. Salvador, they haven't altered your immune system. That's a lie to keep you from leaving the building. Salvador refused to move. The guards were only 2 levels above them now. Carmen grabbed the farmhand and pushed him against the panic bar. Alarms filled the stairwell as the door burst open, and they tumbled out into the cold. Terrified, Salvador tried to cover his mouth and nose. Carmen dragged the stunned man to his feet and pulled him away from the building. She waved down an autocab, shoved the gagging Salvador inside, then jumped in after him. Security guards began to boil out of the fire door, helpless to stop them. Carmen sipped her coffee and read the news feeds. Over the last month, nothing had been mentioned about the vertical farm, although she hadn't expected there to be. Closed systems had paid a lot to bury the story, not an uncommon practice in the zone, and she had benefited from that largesse enough to quit SynthBio, who refused to reinstate her agent status despite the scale of the illegal operation she had uncovered. Salvador was being rehabilitated but still feared the outdoors. She was going to visit him in a few days. Her handheld buzzed with a message. Heard through mutual friends about the vertical farm. Great work. Interested in freelancing? Carmen looked at the sender's ID, smiled, and put the handheld down. She would think about it.
Makeshift Stories is released in the first week of each month. This month's story was written by Vern Hume, aka Alan V. Hare, and read by Steve Peterson. Opening and closing themes were composed and recorded by Matthew Erdman. Audio production and editing by Vicata Studios. Makeshift Stories is released under a Creative Commons non-commercial, attribution, no derivative license.